marketing/video editing computer and not being able to afford to buy one 10 years ago, Kyle built one from parts. In July, that computer died. Oh, sad. Kyle had to start again, and the process was not as smooth as the first time. Telling us about Building Matilda, adventures in constructing your own computer, please help me welcome Kyle Hall.
Thank you, Megan. I should tell you up front, I have a master's degree in computer engineering. But you know what? None of that matters because that education is 30 years ago, and the technology we're using today in computers, the technology we're using 10 years ago is advanced so much, it hardly matters. And I didn't work in computer engineering. I mean, I worked for a computer engineering company, but I was in marketing, and later on I was in consulting and sales and project management. I didn't write code. I didn't build computers. I think the only thing my master's degree in computer engineering gave me was the willingness to say, I'm going to try it. So 10 years ago, I built my computer. And that it went really smoothly. I spent a lot of time researching. I bought some stuff. I bought the parts. I assembled the parts. And in 3 days, I had a functional computer. I was amazed how smoothly it went. And last July, it died. And that's a longer story, which I'm not going to tell because I don't have time. But I had to build a new computer. I had to start from scratch. Now, things have changed in 10 years. In 10 years ago, I had to do a lot of research and then put together what I thought was a configuration. And when I say put together, I mean write it out. And then put it in a forum for experts on this stuff to tell me, would that configuration work? And they said, yeah, and I built it and it worked. Great. Well, nowadays, you can do things much easier sometimes. So when you decide to build a computer, if you decided to build a computer, you could go to Pangali.com. That's one website. There's other websites that do this, but this happens to be the one I used. I didn't even have to create an account. Although if I did create an account, I could not only configure my computer here, I could buy it through this website, buy the pieces. But Pangali had a section on, you can compare specs, you can look at a PC builder, you can read some guides on how to do this. And this is what I use, picking the PC parts. And here's the important thing. There's several different standards by which parts are built. There's big towers with big motherboards, and there's small towers with smaller. You have to pick a standard, and you have to make sure all the parts that you're buying fit that standard. Well, this website does that for you. You pick the motherboard, you pick the standard of the motherboard. It'll tell you what cases fit the motherboard, what CPUs fit the motherboard, what memory fits the motherboard. So it will help do some of that work for you. Now, I went through that and I ordered my CPU and my motherboard and my memory and my graphics card and all this stuff. And now I'm going to walk you through some of that process and hopefully do it quickly so I can tell you about the adventure part. So I bought the CPU. That's what this thing looks like. It's tiny. There's hundreds of pins there, and you have to be really careful that you are grounded when you're handling this thing, because the static electricity in your hand from rubbing your thumb and finger together could cause a circuit to break. That CPU, this is a motherboard, that CPU fits in that spot that I have the arrows pointing to. There's a little lever at the south part of that. You really can't see it. You put the CPU and you fold the lever down and it locks it in place. Now, every time you get one of these CPUs, I was building a high performance gaming computer and video editing computer. CPUs generate a lot of heat. So they always put a small heat sink on top of the CPU, and then your fans blow air by to take the heat off the heat sink. But I want a high performance computer, so I went I went a little beyond that. Oh, sorry. Let me, I'm going to go back. Sorry. Okay, back. That is a piece of memory. And I have this slide in the wrong place. That's a memory. That's a 32 gigabytes of memory. I'll show you where that goes in a minute. Underneath where this arrow is, there's an onboard terabyte of memory. That's the hard disk for the computer. And if you know anything about computers, a terabyte hard disk, solid state drive on the motherboard, this is blazingly fast. Now, I mentioned I needed a heat sink. That's my heat sink. I bought a really big heat sink. Underneath this is where the CPU is. So all the heat is being sucked off that CPU by these copper rods up into here, up into these I don't know what you call them, wings or whatever. And there's a fan attached to the heat sink. The fan attaches right to the heat sink and blows the air through to keep that CPU cool so it can keep working. Now, if you go back here, you see these 4 slots down here. This is for the memory, that memory stick I showed you. I've got 4 of them. So I've got 128 gigabytes of onboard RAM, which is a lot of RAM, a lot compared to any requirements right now, and a graphics card. So that's a graphics card. And you'll notice there's 3 fans here. So the graphics card has its own fans to keep it cool. When I got all these parts, and I also got the case, and I assembled it all, and they didn't all arrive the same day. I had to, over the course of a week, I gathered the parts together. I set aside, okay, this day I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start assembling. And I worked and I worked and I worked, and it took me about 8 hours to assemble the thing. And all the things plugged in, and it's like, okay, here's the moment of truth. I put the power switch on and I press the on button. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. And I forgot the cardinal rule. The cardinal rule is you test everything before you put it in, if possible, or you test it. You test it. I assembled the whole thing. That in my memory, that's what I did last time, and I don't know. I don't think that's exactly what happened. I assembled the whole thing and then pressed the power button to test it, and of course it didn't work. So I had to disassemble it and start testing the components. And you can't just test the motherboard because the motherboard doesn't have any output. You have to put the graphics card on the motherboard. If you're going to put the graphics card on the motherboard, you also have to put the CPU. So you can't just test the motherboard or the CPU. I don't have equipment to do that. So anyway, I started the testing process. I'm going to share my screen again. So I started the testing process, and I put the motherboard with the CPU and of course the heat sink and the graphics card in place, and I plugged in my power supply. And at first it didn't work. So fortunately, remember the computer I told you stopped working in July? I didn't just throw it out. I cannibalized it. I took it apart. So I had its power supply. So I took out my new power supply. I plugged in my old power supply, and it worked. Everything started working. So I was like, okay, so what's wrong? Maybe my power supply is bad. Let's disconnect the old power supply, plug in the new one. And this time it worked. What happened is that I didn't put a connector in firmly enough. So this was my first test. This is a video. This is my first test. And you can see the fan running, and the white here on the top of these memory sticks. That's actually a glowing LED. I was so happy I got this to work, and this is outside of the case. And I want to skip this and go on to the next thing. Okay. The other indication that it worked was I had I had the graphics output connected to this monitor, and I got text on a screen. So it worked. Now the computer's not done and it's not assembled, and there's no operating system, but it worked. This is the case that I bought for it to go in before I started putting anything in. One of the things I wanted you to appreciate is how small you have to, how small an area you have to work in sometimes. You see this connector that I'm pointing to down here? There's something like 12 different pins, and some of the connectors I had to put on an individual pin. And you might appreciate how tough that would be when you see this next one. This is the whole case with the motherboard, the CPU, the graphics card, and that's that little connector down there. And I have to get my big hands in there. Actually, I use needle nose pliers. And this is the power supply down here. The other thing I wanted you to notice, see the cables, these big heavy cables? These are power cables going to various parts of the PC, coming out of the power supply. This is the back of the computer. I wanted to show you this for a couple of things. This is a hard drive. Here's a hard drive. Down here is 2 hard drives. The other thing I wanted to show you, one of the annoyances, one of the important things about when you're putting a computer together is cable management, because you've got cables going everywhere and you've got to bind them together and pull them out of the way. You notice like this little red thing, this little red zip tie grabs these data cables, and there's a little metal loop there I can attach it to, and it not only binds them together, it pulls them out of the way so I can get at some of the other things. Cable management is important. You can't just have all the cables flying around. This is what the inside looks like. Everything is wired up. All of the hard drives have data and power. Everything's wired up, and it is working. This is what it looks like before I put the cover back on it. And here's the computer again, only this time it's running. I'm testing it. You can see that the LEDs on the memory is glowing, and hey, I've got Windows. I'm starting to. I tried to be cheap. I bought an old version of Windows 8, thinking I could install it and then upgrade it for free, and it wouldn't work. Windows 8 was too old. It would not work. It would not load onto this hardware. So I had to go back and buy a version of Windows 10. I still got it relatively cheap, but I got Windows 10 and I loaded it. So Windows 8 didn't work. I got this, error thing, and I spent half a day trying to solve that, and then I just said the hell with it and bought Windows 10, downloaded it onto a USB drive, and I installed Windows 10. And this is my computer with Windows 10 installed, coming up for its first login. And I can't take the camera off me to show you, but I'm using this computer right now. And I installed Windows 10 on this computer on Sunday. So Sunday, a little bit of time on Monday, and a little bit of time today, getting the computer ready, getting the software loaded so I could run Zoom, so I can be talking to you tonight. But all of this was so that I could build myself a high-end gaming and video editing. I wanted a computer that will run VR, virtual reality. And I looked at this thing. I spent about $1,800 buying this stuff. And by the way, remember I told you the first time I plugged everything together, it didn't work. Well, it turns out the case had a bad connection. I had to send the case back and get a new case. Also, the graphics card had a problem. I had to send the graphics card back and get a new graphics card. I ended up replacing the graphics card, the case, and the motherboard. Those 3 pieces all had to be replaced. So 2 months this process took, but I finally have a functional system. And if you were to buy a system like this, I think it would cost you double at least double what I paid for it, maybe 2.5 times or more what I paid for it. So you can do this too if you choose to. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.
Game over.